brought to you by our sponsor, the American Arbitration Association. And I'm pleased to have as our guest today on episode 47 of Sports Shorts, Rich Ensor, the commissioner of the MAC, the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. I think maybe the longest serving conference commissioner at present, maybe ever.
I don't know about ever, but certainly of the current crew, I've been there 35 years. So quite a term.
Winding down at the end of the year.
I am. June 30th, we go on an academic year, but looking forward to having a little bit more freedom in my schedule. I'm not necessarily retiring as much as transitioning to something else, I think.
Well, I think that's likely. Well, Rich is also, besides his day job, he's on the board and the treasurer of the Sports Lawyers Association. So we got a couple of doses here, a conference commissioner, a board member, a board officer. And the way we start these programs off, Rich, is just to sort of talk a little bit to us about what exactly your job is as a commissioner of a conference, and then to talk a bit about your path to getting there.
Sure. Well, a conference commissioner basically manages the sports for the members of a conference. So in our case, we have 11 private institutions, largely in the Northeast, schools like Manhattan, Siena, who beat Florida State the other night in basketball, and an event we hosted down in Orlando. But these schools make up the MAC, and my board of directors are the school presidents. And we're one of 32 conferences in the NCAA and make up D1. And within the conference operation, we do all the scheduling for 22 some odd sports, run the championships, do the broadcasting and marketing of these sports, and handle the compliance issues relative to both our own rules and the NCAA rules, and interact on governance issues with the NCAA. So it's a wide range of responsibilities, and we have silos here of people that work in championships, people that work in compliance, finance, marketing, broadcasting. And then the MAC is very focused on basketball. So I have two individuals that are both working, one on women's basketball full-time, one on men's. So, and that's what we do day to day. We come in here and try to figure out how to improve the conference, how to have some success with our postseason when we get into the NCAA championships. And that worked out really well for us last year when St. Peter's went on a nice little run in the men's Final Four tournament and ended up in the Elite Eight, which was really quite an achievement for them. So it's a very rewarding job, and one I have enjoyed for 35 years.
And so what was the path that you took? How did you find yourself in athletic?
Well, I found myself in athletics. I kind of walked into it like a lot of people do. I came out of high school and just became a manager for our programs at St. Peter's. And in those days, talking about the early 70s, it wasn't the glamorous lifestyle you see today. Got very involved on the ground level and worked my way up. My college basketball coach took a job at St. Louis as a AD, and he brought me out there as an assistant AD. And from there, I had time at Seton Hall as a marketing director, and St. Peter's as a sports information director, and got a lot of different skill sets along the way. Ultimately decided to go back and get my master's degree, which I did at UMass Amherst, and met a guy named Glenn Wong, who I think you know, Bobby, as well as many of our friends in the Sports Lawyers Association. And Glenn and I became good friends as well as colleagues. And from there, I went to law school at Seton Hall, where I graduated. Joined the faculty at UMass for a couple of years, and then when this job opened 35 years ago, the president of St. Peter's was chairing the committee, and he sought me out to put my name into the contention for the job. So, and one thing led to another, and here I am 35 years later. But I think it's not untypical of my era that you would work your way up through the system and learn different skill sets along the way that you could apply. I think today you see a little change in that, that philosophy. You see, especially on the major level, they're going outside the normal ranks of college athletic administrators and bringing people in from the entertainment industry, like George at the Pac-12 or someone that came out of the NFL like Kevin at the Big Ten. So a different skill set than perhaps you would have normally seen. And they are becoming big entertainment industries, those major conferences, and I understand why those skill sets might be important. But sometimes they also don't have that feel for the game that you have if you work your way up as an AD or like in my case, came in as a commissioner. So it's an interesting learning curve for those people that come in from that world.
Yeah, I think it's that you point out something very interesting, which is the various kinds of skill sets that different jobs offer to you. So when you become a conference commissioner, you sort of, as you described it, you have a lot of silos. You've worked in most of them.
Yeah.
So you have a familiarity. So it's not, the learning curve for you is a little different than someone like, George or Kevin, who come to a Power 5 conference that never really seem, at least to my knowledge, work their way through a college system. They are sort of outsiders taking a CEO role, basically. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, it's reasonable. I think their goal sets are a lot different too. They're supposed to move the revenue needle significantly, and it's a much different. I have challenges as far as finances, but I don't have to increase our revenue flow by $100 million on the next TV agreement either. So,
well, that raises a really interesting question, which is, there are, you said 32 conferences
Yep.
in the country, and most of the discussion we have is about 5 of them, and they get most of the noise. And part of that noise is, I think, the media related, and they're dealing with, the Big Ten just signed $1 billion media rights deal,
Right.
multi-billion media rights deal. The SEC's deal's damn near that. The Big 12 just signed a big deal. We're waiting to see what's going to happen in the PAC, but these are significant media buys, which creates to my mind's eye, having come from that world, it creates a very different reality for a conference commissioner, because now you're dealing with a much different constituency when you're dealing with the media companies, and more so this dramatic change of the last 18 months since everybody's 3 favorite letters, N-I and L, entered the scene. And that seems to have created a pretty big shift across all of college. Certainly we see it in the Power 5 conferences. Are you seeing it in conferences like yours, where the player movement, or is it less?
We're having a lot of player movement because of the portal, but not necessarily NIL driven. So we have some NIL money that is filtered in, and some of those players on St. Peter's that went to the Elite Eight ended up at major programs. And I think they're probably getting some NIL money, and that's good. They should. If the institutions have that and the conferences are providing those resources to their schools, some of it should filter back to the athletes. In our case, I'm willing to share the loss every year with the athletes. I don't think they want to do that, but we operate on a much different. I work off of dues and sponsorship monies and broadcast rights, but they're such different numbers. I have a $6-7 million budget, and we're happy if we break even on a given year. So it's a different dynamic. But for the majors, I think those guys have to have certain skill sets with dealing with leaders in those other industries that they probably have crossed paths with because of where they were. In Kevin's case, in the NFL, and George in the gaming industry. I think what their challenge is then is being able to merge the mission of their conferences and their member schools to whatever those deals entail, and those are challenges. But Greg Sankey worked his way up through the system. He's more the traditionalist. So there's still a mix of that. And Jim Phillips at the ACC, he worked his way up as an AD at a number of places. So it's not altogether gone that direction, but the media buys and the ability to understand what goes into them and to hire the consultants, really, that'll help them get there. Because even at that level, there's a room full of consultants working on those deals with them. Because who does really know what the number is at the end of the day,
Yeah, well, that's the interesting part. I mean, what's publicly released and the reality may or may not be accurate, but none of us are in the room, and you sort of rely on what people are going to report. And that, of course, is the interesting part when you're, any kind of negotiation in any kind of deal. If you're saying, well, they got this, I should get that. And sometimes when you make that statement, the people with whom you're negotiating say, they didn't get that.
Yeah, and what's
That
the
we,
market,
but
what's their market share versus your market share? And
yeah,
the Pac-12 suffer from being so Western Coast oriented in terms of media markets and, all those kind of things. Some cases it's apples to oranges, and some of it's just straight out, you got to negotiate better. Yeah,
but in a conference like yours, which is, relatively a smaller conference with a lower budget, the athletes are still entitled now to make NIL money.
sure.
Are you addressing it on a conference basis with regard to compliance and rules, or is that left to each of your member institutions? How are you coping with
We've
that?
left it to the institutions, Bobby, partly because we're in 3 different states, 4 now actually, and they all have different state regs to deal with as well. So I can't come in and just level it all, because I may be running afoul of different state regs. New York State just signed a law last week or the last 2 weeks. For the first time, they have a statute in place. So we have left it to the institutions. I think primarily what we've done and the institutions have done is tried to educate the athletes about their rights and make sure that they're following whatever rules are in place, both statewide and the limited rules that the NCAA has. But by and large, they may have skill sets that lend themselves to be able to get NIL money. It may not be athletic ability necessarily, maybe other skill sets in the past that were prohibited from being utilized. And in some cases, they may be able to do lessons and things like that related to sports. But we're not talking $1 million deals here. This is a different level. I mean, my coaches have trouble getting endorsement deals, never less the athletes,
But still, I think one of the issues that is most important in the space, and I'm just curious to know how perhaps your conference is dealing with it, is, and I hate to be saying this because I grew up in an era where when I was a senior in high school, they taught things about government and about real world experiences and banks and taxes and whatnot. And that seems to have disappeared from secondary education.
Mhm.
So are there financial literacy programs that you have to now bring to the athletes?
We've always had those in place for a long time. That's been in place. That was required to a certain extent by the NCAA even before the NIL came about. And it was just part of our commitment to the athletes. And again, I'm privileged to work for a lot of private schools. They don't necessarily, they're pretty high level academic schools. They're bringing in fairly well educated people, students, and so that they come in with pretty good skill sets, and then we provide them tools to learn how to develop them further. But yeah, the basics of having a bank account and making sure you don't go over on a credit card debt statement is something that they're all taught regularly. We call them life skills programs,
which is great, and I think that's a really important part of the education of all of us, but certainly the athletes, particularly if you have, I think we've seen the issue where you have kids from lower income communities who come into college and they're offered this money through their NIL program, but they don't understand that, I got to pay taxes on it.
Well,
little things like that.
Well, you have college graduates that go into the pros and don't know how to manage their money historically. So, and agents haven't necessarily helped that process always. So it's a difficult, somebody comes into a windfall of profits, from either their NIL or from their athletic ability, then going out and managing that, not everybody can handle it. And if they don't have good advisors, they're in trouble. But for our athletes, generally, NIL is being taught. They know they can go out and engage in it. Some of them can be influencers. Some of them can be, they can show up at the local pizza place on Thursday night and everybody can come over if they want, whatever it is. But we're not talking about, 6-figure deals by any means.
Sure, but the reality is, if you don't handle it correctly, a $200 payment could lose you your eligibility.
Yeah, because, well, and a little bit on eligibility, but more importantly, you don't want to run afoul of the IRS at some point,
Well,
yeah.
that's a big issue. But one of the issues that's always concerned me in the last 18 months, since we're in this Wild West world, and I still think it's kind of a Wild West world, is, how this is really playing out, and with all these different state laws and no national regulation, these kids are being, in some of the big programs, there are a few athletes, men and women, that are making significant sums of money.
Sure. Yeah, they are. And I think it's got to be again, I'm not in this position, so I can't speak with firsthand knowledge, but managing a team where you have some players getting X amount and other players getting nothing or minimal amounts, that must be really interesting to manage. I can imagine what a football team's like when the linemen aren't getting what the quarterback's getting. It's excuse me, let me get out of the way. Offensive guy. Yeah. Quarterback, meet this lineman over here.
Yeah, well, look, it's really an interesting space, but there's been all this talk around NIL that says it's, there's no pay for play. You can't do pay for play. And that sounds really good. But the transfer portal that exists now, where an athlete doesn't lose their eligibility and they can move, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck, but you got to think to yourself, is he leaving this institution for that institution because their collective has more to offer, or there's deals in place? I'm not in the room. I don't know what those conversations are, but it's interesting to see, an athlete from a D1 football program that's really good suddenly transferring to another really good program. And
within the conference, their own conference too, right?
And that's a head scratcher to me.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things. One, pay for play itself. The NCAA is looking for a case. They're looking for a good, solid case to pursue. I'm on the infractions committee, and I know that John Duncan on the enforcement side is, they're just waiting for the right case to come along, because there's a lot of speculation, but it's very hard to get the evidence to show the actual transaction. They don't have subpoena power, and so they have to really go. Somebody's going to have to turn on the process. They're gonna go into it and not get delivered what they were told, and then they're gonna basically turn state's evidence at some point, right? And it's gonna become the test case. I was promised this, I got there, and then they didn't give it to me. It'll be interesting to see how it develops, but they are looking at that. The transfer portal is another whole thing. It's just too many coincidences, people suddenly are moving, and for no real reason other than, the playing. But is it really better playing opportunity, or is it just a better, NIL situation? And how is that presented to them? And the collectives are supposedly independent from the athletic departments, but I don't see it. I don't see how they can manage that and really consider them independent. So, well, interesting.
There's a big change. I know that I was at a football game at my alma mater a couple of weeks ago, sitting with all the season seat ticket holders that I've been sitting with for a very long time. And interestingly, the main topic of conversation was, are these star freshmen going to stay?
Yeah.
And that was, you used to think, what kid's going to move to lose a year of eligibility and sit out a year? This change is, it's basically created free agency in college athletics.
Yeah, at least the one time. I agree completely. It has changed, and coaching is really changing, because now you have to recruit your team constantly. You don't just recruit them once. You have to recruit them every year. And then you're also moving players along too. They sometimes they want to push players out. It's a very dynamic setting. And I ask our coaches each year to tell me, are we winning or losing on the portal? because sometimes we get players that come down from a major program that get much more playing time with us and do much better and have
Sure.
a better experience. But we're also losing players up the portal, and by and large, they've told me up to the last month or two that we were doing better, winning more cases, and then we were losing. But lately, I see a little bit more of a shift, and I just think it's going to wear coaches out. Frankly, it's a very difficult situation
Well,
to constantly manage that.
coaching a college program is in and of itself a very tough and very stressful job. I don't care what level you're coaching at. Obviously, as you go into the Power Five top football programs, it's a little different. But if you're Nick Saban making $11 million a year or whatever he makes, doesn't mean he's not working harder than everybody else. But it's a very different reality, because now it seems to me that it's what you said. There's coaches traditionally recruited players, brought players in the program, brought them along through the program, tried to get them to be part of sort of the ethos of an athletic program. Now it seems coaches are recruiting guys and then having to keep recruiting them through the entire season.
Yeah.
I think it's changed how a coach coaches too, probably.
Well, and how you approach a player, getting in their faces isn't necessarily going to win the re-recruiting war. If they're coaching is very tough, I think, to begin with, and I think all these rule changes are making it a lot tougher. I do notice one thing in the mid-majors, you're seeing a lot of upsets in the preseason space. I think there's two parts of that. One is a lot of the major programs have so much turnover that they haven't really gotten a team that's playing together right quite yet early in the season. And then on the mid-major side, we have sometimes teams that have been playing a fair amount of for a fair number of years together as a group, as a core group. And if you can keep the players, they come in pretty seasoned and are able to handle some of these majors better than you would expect. So it's an interesting dynamic in and of itself. It's also been very confused by the whole COVID situation, Bobby. We got a team, I think, that has 4 23-year-old basketball players right now.
And they're sixth year of eligibility.
Well, they got like fifth and sixth year, if they had an injury and then they had a pandemic, they had hell, they've been in school. They're coming out with master's degrees and PhDs by the time they get done with their playing career. But that's also clouded the whole situation, and that's going to have to sort itself out for another year or two. I think what we're going to see at some point is that graduation rates are going to start plummeting, because there's every time you transfer, no matter where you transfer, you're going to lose some credits. You're going to
Sure.
Not everything's going to get accepted at the next school, and if you're not on top of that, you're going to start seeing people fall off the cliff and not graduate. And we've gotten to a point where we're doing pretty good on graduation rates, frankly. And it's been a big improvement over the last 10, 15 years. But on the other hand, with all these new dynamics playing into it, I think it could impact it negatively as we move forward.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see, you look every March in the March Madness, in the basketball tournament, you have mid-majors that go deep in the tournament because, lo and behold, they have a team of guys that have been playing together for 3 or 4 years, and they know each other and they work and they beat major programs.
Yeah,
but that ethos doesn't seem to carry through, that team concept. And I'm an old school guy. Join a team, join a club, and you stay with it. It's your place. That sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, loyalty, seems to be fading from college athletics in some respects.
Well, some of it's been driven by the fact that coaches have been getting multi-million-dollar deals. They keep moving around a lot themselves. So, the players, in some cases, feel the same way. Why should I be loyal? The coach left the minute somebody dangled a better contract at him. I'm not criticizing coaching.
No.
I mean, the MAC is a coaches league where people move up the food chain. And if they have really successful times here, we provide the majors with a lot of good coaches a shot Shaw, who's at Seton Hall, he was at St. Peter's last year. Franny McCafferty out in Iowa. I can go down a long list.
Sure.
Guys that came out of the MAC. So that's just part of the business. But now the business is also applying to the athletes. And so, the same, that loyalty is stretched pretty thin if somebody's really offering you a opportunity to play on a team that might get to the Final Four, as opposed to getting to your conference championship.
Yeah, well, I think you said exactly what it is that people don't want to really highlight about college athletics is the business part of it.
Yeah.
And once you start saying, it's the business of college sports is a very broad topic, but it's everything from, running the day-to-day programs, and it's about recruiting and maintaining talent, like in any business.
Well, there was a great article in the New York Times last weekend about the whole influx of sponsorship money from the gambling industries, and how colleges are welcoming that. And well, that's a very different approach than we would have had 25 years ago. And I think those are highly regulated industries. I've been in New Jersey, Atlantic City's had gambling forever, and we're the ones that had the lawsuit against the NCAA. So I fully understand the business model, but the way that people now run after that money because it's a good business deal, and maybe don't step back and say, oh, what are we saying to our student bodies? Forget about the athletes, about, gambling, and are we educating our students about that while we're promoting gambling on campus? So
look, I know that one of the big fantasy companies, or actually one of the betting, not even fantasy company, betting companies that are involved are now actively seeking to start putting out PSAs from coaches talking about, not about go bet, but about the issues and the dangers of, et cetera, which I think is a good effort. But, legalized gambling obviously changes so much.
Mm-hmm.
And, the whole, I can't even imagine, the sort of the integrity issues that now live in college sports, because you no longer just have the story like at City College in the 50s and that kind of stuff. It seems that, it's a whack-a-mole game now because there's so much legal money being poured into the sport. Seems to me a very daunting task to oversee this kind of stuff.
Well, but there is a lot of integrity efforts underway, and the data metrics really point out when there's something askew in a way that we never had that available 30, 40 years ago. We're in Atlantic City with our tournament and have been there for 3 years, and the teams stay at casino hotels, so I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying it's a different dynamic when you're talking about sports business. When you have tournaments, and you have 5 tournaments in Las Vegas now, postseason tournaments. The NCAA is moving their first and second rounds there in a couple of years. I just saw that announcement this week.
Yeah,
there are people in the Walter Byers is turning over in his grave. So what are we doing? Yeah, it's a different business dynamic, and you do have to change with the times, but recognize that the athletes want to be part of that revenue distribution in a way they never were before.
Sure, seat at the table. Everybody wants it. Well, Rich, look, it's we could keep going, but it's time to sort of wind up our program. Really appreciate your taking the time to talk about this. It's really interesting. I bet 35 years ago, you never thought you were going to be a CEO when they said you're conference commissioner, but here you are, and you're dealing with all those dynamic business issues that any business executive is going to have to deal with.
True, Bobby. I got to tell you, it's a small business operation. It really is. And I didn't know that when I walked in the door. I have personnel issues. I have insurance issues. I have payroll to meet, and, you have pension plans to run. And that's just to run the office. Never lets the rest of the conference. So, when I first got hired, there were only 2 people here. It was me, a full-time assistant, and a secretary. And they wanted me to fire the full-time assistant. I said, wait a sec. My board, when they hired me, I said, if I fire him, who's going to know what I'm supposed to do next? Because I don't. So it certainly has grown. We have I think 14 employees now, and it's an interesting dynamic dealing with personnel, as you know. But
Sure.
yeah, much different business than when I came in. We didn't have Zoom either, Bobby. In fact, one of the first things I did was buy all our ADs computers so I could email them because they didn't have emails. And I said, we're not mailing everything. Even in 1988, I knew enough to know we needed email. So it's just a different world.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much. And we'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode of Sports Charts. And since this is brought to you by the Sports Lawyers Association, it's a good time to remind everyone to renew your memberships. Our memberships are on a calendar basis. So everybody's membership expires at the end of the year. So just go ahead, go to the site, renew your membership, little toggle button, sportslaw.org, renew your membership, and we will see you all in person in May in Los Angeles for our annual conference. And the theme for this year is the athlete.
Looking forward to that, Bobby. Yeah, Staples Center, right down there.
Yeah.
It'll be a great site for that. And thank you for all your work on this program.
No, appreciate it.
You do a lot of extras that don't go unnoticed. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for being our guest. We'll see you all in 2 weeks. And everybody, hope you had a great Thanksgiving. And let's hope the USA can knock off the Netherlands on Saturday in the round of 16.
That's for sure. Have a
All
good
right, everybody. Thanks, Rich.